Thanks for watching and listening to the When Love Leads podcast. You'll be hearing today from some of our special guests as they share with you stories of faith at work. You can help more people find out about the podcast by liking us on social media pages like Facebook and LinkedIn. Now, join us as we explore people of faith at work. Well, welcome back to another episode of the When Love Leads podcast. As always, I'm Bill Marsh, here joined by our other co-host, Rick Hasty. Rick, introduce our guest to us today, if you would.
Yes, it's very exciting. Recently, I got to know Nadya Dickson and asked her to be a guest on our show, and I'm just thrilled by all the things that she's involved in. Not nearly as long as I've been involved in, but sounds to me like a whole lot more, especially the good stuff. So, Nadya, I'd love for you just to maybe introduce yourself a little bit, and then we got a list of questions for you.
Well, such a privilege to be here, and I love that you're doing this show. I am an American as of 2013, but I was born in Nova Scotia, Canada, and I've been living in the U.S. Since 2000. I've had a background in pastoral ministry. I've worked as an administrator with a large denomination, and for the biggest part of my life, I've been in consulting and a coach, formational coach.
Well, tell us a little bit personally.
Okay.
Married, kids.
Yes, all of that, all the good things.
Yes.
So I've been married to Nadya Dickson. That's my husband of going on 18 years. That was a remarriage. I have two sons, Alex, who is 31. I can't believe it. And Andrew, who's 23. And I have three grandchildren, Ezra, Luca, and Dee Dee.
Wonderful. Bill, I was thinking when she said 31, she was saying she was 31.
I was convinced.
I'm convinced of that.
Well, as Bill and I can attest, if you're in the grandparent club, you are in one fine club.
That's right.
It's the
Absolutely.
best. I live in the Lake Norman area, so not far from Charlotte. We moved here 3 years ago and love it so much. So we're getting ready to do some water sports this evening. I can't wait.
Ooh, very well. We'll try not to keep you too long and away from that. Bill and I are both avid water sports people. So Bill fortunately gets to live on the waters. Tell us a little about your faith journey. How'd you come to know Christ and how'd you get to this point?
Yeah, well, actually, I was not raised in a home that practiced any particular faith. My mother immigrated from Lebanon when she was a young teenager, and she was actually raised as a Muslim. So when she came to Canada, she went to high school and she met my father, who was raised in a Christian home, and they ended up eloping, which caused almost a World War III. And so when they had children, they decided, we don't want to impose that on our children. We're going to let them figure out their own faith. And so it wasn't until I was in my first year of university that someone introduced me to Christ. And yes, you can meet Jesus at college. I'm here to attest that. And so I became a Christian at the age of 18, and I was really supported by some amazing campus ministries like IVCF and the Navigators in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So that's where I met Jesus. And it was just a few years later that I ended up going to Bible college in the United States.
So what Bible college did you attend?
I went to World Evangelism in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I studied evangelism and music, and then moved back to Canada and was an associate pastor, youth pastor, children's pastor, and then St. John's, Newfoundland as a youth pastor. I know, all over.
That is a long way from Louisiana, I'll tell you that.
It was a radical conversion, Rick. I was such a rebellious teenager, a real hellion. And when I met Jesus, it was a radical change in my life, a radical change in the trajectory of my life. And
in what way, Nadya?
Well, I was studying fine arts and theater. I was a musician at the time. And so it made me question my whole life and, the direction that I was taking. I was encouraged by a church mother. She thought she saw a call on my life and that maybe I would want to consider Bible study and Bible college. And so she actually flew me to the Bible college from Nova Scotia to Louisiana and introduced me to their music department. And I decided to go. My parents weren't thrilled about that decision, but I went, and I still have friends today from my Bible college days. But it really impressed upon me. I was young. I wasn't well discipled. I learned a lot while I was at college and just had a heart for evangelism, especially for, at that time, young, the inner city kids. We did a lot of inner city ministry. And so I was introduced to just forget just being in the South from Canada. That was culture shock. But then the whole inner city was another culture shock to me. But it gave me such a heart for God's people and for diversity and ministry. And that's always been a thread, through my life.
Well, I was confused when you said inner city ministry because I wasn't sure there was an inner city in Halifax.
No, I searched that. It was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we would bring 1,000 kids, to this very large church every weekend and have puppet ministry, food ministry. We give them Thanksgiving and Christmas. It was just amazing, to see how God works in such small kids. We had a lot of children that were working alongside us too. So that's always been impactful to me.
Well, walk us through the rest of your career up to this point, maybe highlights.
Sure. Okay. Well, business ownership has been in my family. A lot of the Middle Eastern people they come to this country or Canada and they work for you, and then tomorrow you work for them. And so I was just raised around entrepreneurship. It wasn't much later after being in ministry that I decided I really still had a desire for business and thought I had to pick one or the other. I didn't know that you could do both. I thought, well, you're either a pastor or you're a businesswoman, but you're not both. And God was saying, you need to just take me out of this box that you've put me in and take yourself out of this box. I have something for you. And it wasn't until I was working with a consultancy in Charlotte, North Carolina, that I was introduced to a spiritual formational program called the Master's Program. And after going through that 3-year program, I realized that I was a marketplace minister, if you had to put language on it, which was just something new and interesting to me. I didn't know that you could do both. And I know that's what your show is about. And so I can't wait to get into that. But I just kept toggling back and forth and trying to figure out, how am I going to express my love for you and serve you in the marketplace. And I worked with a man named Sam Frowine at the Performance Group. And we had meetings every Monday morning for our clients, and we prayed for them. So we prayed about our clients. We prayed about how we were going to serve them. Some of them were Christian and some of them were not. It didn't matter. And it was at that point that I realized that life is integrated. There is no sacred or secular divide. And it was just a matter of time before I ended up coaching for the master's program. When we worked in consulting, we worked with assets, underperforming assets. And when I was asked to consider coaching this formation program, I realized I had been an underperforming asset. And I wanted to work with people who weren't as engaged or who were thinking like I was previously, that there's a sacred and a secular divide. So I've been coaching and teaching this program since 2012 and serve as the national director for the women's program as of 2018. And I also have my own consultancy where I focus on strengths coaching and strengths consulting.
So Nadia, tell us more about the master's program. That's something I'm not very familiar with.
Well, it all started in 1984. There's a gentleman by the name of Bob Shank who was a business owner and an amazing Bible teacher in Orange County, California. He was operating and running a family business, HVAC contracting business, large business, and just learned that he could serve God and have a redemptive business. When he took an opportunity to do a turnaround in a church as a pastor, as a lead pastor, he realized that there were a lot of successful men in business that attended church that weren't as successful in raising their family, in their marriage, and in kingdom engagement. And so he was really encouraged by two of his colleagues. One was Bob Buford, who wrote the Halftime book, and another, Bruce Wilkinson. They said, there really could be a curriculum around this, Bob. And so it was just a matter of time before Priority Living was born. And he started really, it's almost like an executive graduate program or a Kingdom MBA, this 3-year formational program for men. So it started out for executive men. Their wives started to see their husbands change and said, well, we want to go through this. And so Bob's wife, Sherry, started to teach the women as their spouses were going through. And then my coach, Sandy Olson, said, well, there's a lot of women that are CEOs themselves or that are in executive roles that still need this type of life balance and focus on their kingdom calling. And so that's when they started the women's program. And she came here to Charlotte. I don't know if you remember Bradley Thompson, who used to be the
Sure.
president of New Dominion Bank. Well, that's where I took the program. A lot of his executives went through that program, and it changed my life. I was still working with Sam at the time, but more and more, I just had this heart and passion to see women unleashed in their kingdom calling in the marketplace.
Very good. That's exciting. And that's still active, right? If somebody was interested, how would they find out more about the master's program?
They would just go to Priority Living, and we have a new CEO. His name is Jeff Gearhart. He lives in Dallas, Texas. And my colleague, Rob Dayton, who lives in Santa Barbara. They're both coaches for men, and they have classes across the country. And I facilitate the women's classes in Dallas, Charlotte, and Orange County.
Fantastic. Great.
Yeah. So I'll be facilitating classes in Charlotte this January. And there's an opportunity if our Charlotte listeners want to sit and do a taste and see, there's an opportunity for them to do that. I teach it at the Speedway Club in Charlotte. My husband's in NASCAR. And so, yeah, it's an accelerator for sure. I always joke about
So PriorityLiving.org.
PriorityLiving. And they can learn more about the program there.
Super.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. It's changed so many women's lives, and some of the stories that we're going to get into have really been me getting the privilege of experiencing God moving in the marketplace through so many different practitioners and leaders and executives. Doesn't stop.
Can you think of a time in your career, Nadya, where you felt like what was happening could only be happening because God was making it happen?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it was even the transition that I went through as I was really asking the Lord, where would you have me serve you? And it was, I call them God winks. It's those divine moments where God really makes himself known to you. And it's happened to me in prayer. It's happened through the counsel of others. But I specifically remember getting to my office early one morning. And just, I gave it to the Lord and I said, if this is where you want me to serve, I will. And I felt his presence so heavy in that office before anybody came, just this comfort and this acknowledgement that I'm here. I see you. I have a plan for you. Just be faithful where you are and doors will open to you that no man can shut. And that's exactly what I've experienced. And so just having that personal encounter with him, but then also the ability and the opportunity to have prayerful encounters with others in the marketplace as well.
Think back for a minute on some of the folks you've coached, some of the folks you've worked with in a for-profit setting.
Sure.
Do you think God's really at work there too?
Absolutely. I had a dear friend, as she was going through the program, she deliberated whether or not she should go into full-time ministry. And she was an executive for a tech firm. And we prayed about it together and didn't feel that that was how God was calling her. And so she stayed in that firm. It was just I don't even think it was for another year when another door opened and she ended up taking an executive role in another tech firm, a fintech firm. And the doors of opportunity that opened for her there, not just in her leadership progression, but in the opportunity to be an image bearer for Christ. And so she had been invited by Forbes magazine and other places, and she did live interviews and presents all over the country. And people often ask her, what makes you tech? What makes you so unique and so different? And she said, it's my time with biblical scripture in the morning. I pray and the Lord leads me and helps me with my own life balance and helps me come alongside to, unleash others in their leadership. And there's been times where I remember one specific story. She was speaking at one of the Forbes conferences, and a lady from the Middle East came up to her and said, what is the difference? And she said, honestly, it's Jesus. And she said, I want to know more about that. So opportunities And these are evangelical, but there are other stories where we saw marketplace miracles. Things happen within the framework of the business when it comes to, there was a friend of mine who left a very lucrative position within a hospital system. And the Lord told her to start her own consultancy. And so she did. And just as she was getting things started and all the things that happen when you leave a large corporation and you start your own thing and you become, you're wearing all the hats. It's so challenging after you've had a team and
Yes,
a
it is.
budget. And so just even leaning in and watching the Lord help her with bringing the right people. Well, he had asked her to make a large donation out of her need. So she didn't really have her clients instated yet. She wasn't ready to go and, do the work that she was ready to do. She was still building. And yet the Lord still asked her to give generously, radically. And so she was obedient. Well, a week later, a door had opened for her consultancy to where she had all of the hospitals in this national system. Like across the nation. An incredible contract. But she knew that God was testing her obedience and her faithfulness to know that her job was not going to master her, but that the Lord could trust her, with these clients and with this new contract. So I've seen, even in my own work, typically when women come into my coaching program, they're Christians. Well, there was one lady in Charlotte that came and she wasn't necessarily a committed Christian. She hadn't made a she hadn't surrendered her life to God or made a commitment or a decision. And after her first day there, she said, I just feel like these women know Jesus. And she said, I want to know more about that. And so I told her, after this class is over, you and I will go have coffee. And you've heard this before. We went to a Starbucks and I just started asking her questions about what she knew about God. And she had a background with Catholicism, but hadn't made an actual decision to serve Christ. And so she accepted him as her Lord and Savior right there at the coffee shop. And she's actually getting baptized this Sunday. I get to go watch her get baptized in church, and she's growing in leaps and bounds, and she's in real estate development. And so it's just beautiful to see even how she's learning how to pray about her role, as a broker and working with clients and just seeing God move. Like, as we see all the time through some of the stories of these entrepreneurs that come in through redemptive entrepreneurship and just finding ways that they can advance the kingdom on the platform of private enterprise, right? For-profit enterprise.
Right. Yeah, I too had a pretty abrupt conversion back in my teen years. And so as I went to college, I assumed that if you were an excited believer in Christ, that you really only had one path to follow, which was to go into some kind of full-time ministry. And so as I pursued that and got very involved with a denomination, I soon came to realize, as I was literally filling out my seminary application, that there were a lot of people who ought not be pastors, and I didn't want to be one of them. And if I had become a pastor, I would have been a really bad one. I can tell you that. I'm confident of that. Bill knows me well enough to know that, yeah, that's pretty true. But I did feel the Lord really spoke to me and said, but I can make you a full-time pastor anywhere you work.
Yes.
And so my promise to him back that many years ago was, well, if you ever make it clear to me that you want me in a full-time role, then I'll do that. But until you make it really clear, then I'm just going to do what I do best and what I love to do the most. And so here I sit today talking with others who've really gone through, oftentimes, as you've described, much the same experience. Although you had a little more deeper dip in the water than I did.
But it's interesting. I'm glad that I had that experience because it does give me, perspective. And I do see how whether you're a leader in nonprofit or in church or in for-profit, some of those challenges are similar. There's lots of opportunity for more, connection and relationship between marketplace leaders and nonprofit leaders, pastoral leaders. I think we all, kings and priests, we need each other, right? We need each other. We all have parts of the solution, and we're taking different territory, and we're taking territory differently. But needing that network around us, that support.
I was recently reading in seemingly obscure book in the Old Testament called First Chronicles. It gets ignored way too much, by the way, if you really read it. But I was very intrigued that at the end of First Chronicles, much of which is dedicated to the story of King David is basically in his very final year or two on this earth. And one of the last things he does is he instructs the nation of Israel of how they should be organized. And so in those 5 chapters, 23 to 28, First Chronicles, he lays out very specific instructions for not only priests and Levites, but also generals and soldiers, treasurers. And we know, I think it's easy to see, we're only getting part of the story there, but we're getting a very clear message that all of this was organized in a very specific way by King David. And I would contend it set the nation of Israel up for very significant success, maybe both as a nation and as an economic engine. And so his instructions weren't to the church, weren't to the businesses, but to both equally.
Yes, absolutely. It's so interesting. I love that because I think what you're saying is that the lens that we wear isn't necessarily the reality of things, right? And if we really knew some of these protocols that I think are in Scripture, they really are for business, for family, for government, for economics. They're all in there. I mean, Moses had to lead a nation. And though it may have seemed primitive, he was given national health care, national economics. This is how you govern. This is how you judge. This is how you raise your family. I mean, he was given all of these principles and protocols that he led a nation. And I think they're in there. And I think that we gain the theology of our practice when we pay attention. I know that there's a theology for real estate. There's a theology for business and governance and finance. And God gives us those revelations when we pay attention. And then we get to practice them. We practice righteousness, right? We get to practice them in the trenches.
That's so true. Hey, Bill, here's a good moment for your favorite saying.
Which is, you gotta help me, Rick. I have so many. My wife will tell you. That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. Nadia, where people are coming together, whether it's in nonprofit organizations or for-profit organizations, in a fallen world, there's inevitably going to be conflict, even when people set out with the best of intentions and the best of practices. Talk to us about where you've seen conflict be handled in redemptive ways with some of the leaders and organizations you've worked with.
There's two different stories that I can think of where things were not working, and there was definitely conflict. There was just a lot of static. One was in a board meeting. Christian CEO, not necessarily all the board members were Christian. And one of my colleagues was in the room. She was the only female in the room. They were not getting very far. There was a lot of conflict. And so the guy just threw up his arms. He said, let's just take a break. Let's just go get some ice cream and we'll come back. And he said, Helen, are you coming? And she said, no, I'm going to stay here. There's a few things I need to tend to. So they went and she began to pray. And she laid a hand on each one of those seats in that boardroom. She said, Lord, I see this man has something to say. I pray that you open his mouth with courage. Lord, this one needs to shut it down. She's taking authority over, foolishness and things like that. So everybody came back and they ran through the rest of the agenda. They achieved so much. It was very productive. And the CEO says, see what happens when you eat ice cream, when you go get a break and take ice cream. And she just kind of laughed to herself. And she thought, well, this is probably what we should have done in the first place. There was another situation where a friend of mine was trying to run a meeting with a client, and it was very disruptive, and they weren't getting very far. And it was a pattern that she was seeing over and over again in these meetings. And I remember having a conversation. I said, well, what do you think is the underlying issue? And she said, well, she's fearful. And I said, you know that you can take authority over the spirit of fear because you are a daughter of God. And so before that meeting again, she went into that boardroom, and it doesn't matter whether you're in the boardroom or not, but that's where she went before everybody got in there. And she took authority over the spirit of fear and asked the Lord to give her a spirit of boldness so that she would make the right decisions for her company, her organization. She's talking about her client. Well, they came in and had the meeting, and she made the courageous decision, and they moved forward. And it just reminds me that we battle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, and wicked rulers in high places. And I think we have to deal with the invisible realm before we deal with the visible realm.
Mhm.
And so understanding our authority as daughters and sons of God, knowing that we are called to administrate his agenda on earth, when we deal with these things, and this is the same in a marriage, it could be any situation, but praying against or asking the Lord to show us, like, what is the root cause? What are we really dealing with? And how do you want me to pray about this? And after doing that kind of business, I'm all about my Father's business, then we can go into the natural realm and have conversations that are healing, that are maybe a bit confrontational, but firm and needed. And I really believe that the hard work is done before we have those interactions. And I have to remind myself of this sometimes, especially as I'm dealing with, my family, my kids, my grandkids. And a lot of times people that we deal with that bring the most dysfunction are the most wounded. And just understanding the underlying issues, the root causes, and sometimes it's counseling, and honestly, sometimes it's casting out. And just knowing the difference and discerning the difference in prayer, before coming into these types of conflicts.
When you think back 20 years or so ago to your early career, if you knew then what you knew now, what advice would you want to give to young Nadya? And I think of it particularly in the context, especially one that you work in, which is we have many young ladies in the workplace today. So if you were one of them, what advice would you give yourself?
Wow. I would tell my younger self to be anxious for nothing, but in all things through prayer and thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. I felt like earlier on, and it may have been some of my own woundedness, Rick, coming out of just seeing maybe some of the oppressions and different things that my mother faced in her own young life, that I don't need to prove anything, that I don't need to overfunction, and that I just need to show up and be myself. And honestly, it took a while for me to learn how to just be authentic. There was some people pleasing. There were false expectations and just things that I had to work through. And some of it when I was a leader, unfortunately, healed leaders heal people, but broken leaders break people. And so just in some of my own leadership, I really had to walk through a lot of humbling and, transformation. And so I would tell that young lady that she just has to do her best, have an excellent spirit, and trust God for the rest.
Nadia, as you look back, do you think you learned more through your successes or through your failures?
I would say both. Because both of them bring out what's on the inside. I don't think success ruins people. I don't think that hard times ruin people. I think hard times expose people. And so sometimes it's those very things that bring out the best and the worst in us. But even that's a redemptive opportunity, because you don't know what needs healing or repenting of until it's exposed. And so I would say I learned a lot through both. What I've become more aware of and I'm becoming more passionate about is really the younger generation, the next generation of mothers and fathers and leaders and governors and executives. I mean, they're shaping our world, our policies, our culture. And so really just having a heart of a mentor or a spiritual mother and just coming alongside the next generation through consulting and coaching, mentoring. I think that probably is what I've really been thinking a lot about lately. It's an exciting time. It's an exciting time to be a daughter or a son of God in the world. There is such a need for divine wisdom and leadership. There's such a deficit that I believe God is raising his people up to step into. And just, I feel like this show is definitely a part of that, creating awareness that God is God everywhere we go, that wherever we put our foot, the kingdom of God is at hand, and that he absolutely has templates and blueprints and plans for our culture, for building our city, for building business, all ways that bear his image, all ways that bring the renewal of all things. There's such an incredible opportunity for that.
Nadia, Eric Little, the Olympic runner, about whom the movie Chariots of Fire was made, said that when he ran, he felt God's pleasure. Insight into you. When do you feel God's pleasure?
Personally, I feel God's pleasure when I'm among a community of leaders. Specifically for me, it's women. That's when I feel the most energized, and I feel the smile of God as women are being unleashed in their identity in Christ, discerning what their calling is, and then helping them dream with God and just unleashing them in that. I love that. There's nothing to me that's more gratifying, and I feel like it brings God glory. So I absolutely feel his smile when that happens.
I did want to ask one last question, because you and I got to know each other a little bit through this organization called Redemptive Entrepreneurship. You want to just give us a real quick overview of what that is, especially for the folks here in Charlotte, but that's happening all around the country today. So
yeah, it really is happening all over the country. Well, we serve a particular chapter. I call it a chapter. It's a local expression of Praxis, which started in New York City. And I think Andy Crouch, and I know he has an amazing team with him there. Other leaders have seen how God has really been entrepreneurs who have a heart not just to be ethical in their businesses and to practice righteous principles, but to be redemptive in every aspect of the business. So every stakeholder, every person that's involved will sense a redemptive outcome because this particular business exists, whether it's through the products or services, employees, because there's an enculturation of that in every part of the business. And so we've had this opportunity to meet these young entrepreneurs that are coming in with these incredible, innovative ideas that don't just offer a viable service, a needed service, but do it in such a way that anyone involved is blessed and they feel loved, served, seen, and heard. Not too many people feel that way about their encounters with services and businesses, but to know that that's an opportunity that we have in our, we are created in the image of God. He is a creator. He is the ultimate entrepreneur. He can create something from nothing, and to be able to come alongside and find out what his idea is for particular industries that may be less than ethical, but to find new and creative ways to do that is what Praxis is about. And people have the opportunity to come alongside as a founder of a business, as a mentor, a builder, or a funder. And we have these labs once a year. So if you're a founder and you have a business idea, or you've already started something and you want wise counsel and you want to understand something we call the redemptive frame, which impacts every aspect of the business operationally and financially, you can come and be part of this incredible community that's being built, not just here in Charlotte, but all over the world.
Well, it's exciting. It was exciting to be in a room with you and 80 others the other day, hearing a few founders share their stories of how they're building a redemptive frame around their business. And so thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being with us, Nadya. It's just been great to hang out with you for a little while.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks for watching and listening. Don't forget to click the like button on your app. You can find more episodes like this at our website, whenloveleads.com. While there, you can also sign up for our newsletter, where we explore many of these topics deeper, and be the first to hear about upcoming podcast topics and guests. You can help more people find out about the podcast by liking us on social media pages like Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Finally, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Until next time, remember the difference it makes when love leads.